Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Hodge, JC Abbott, taking a little rest this week from the podcast, gearing up for the playoff run, so he'll be back to 100%. I'm confident, Hodge, we need the guy. We can't be losing a teammate for the playoffs and the run-up to the Grey Cup.
He said he doesn't have a voice, so I'm not sure how useful he'd be here if he was here. The cheese is overdue, Justin. We need to get fresher cheese up into the lineup for next week.
I think people like seeing his muzzy, so he doesn't necessarily have to talk. He could just have shown up, shown off that little porn stash that he has, and then go away. But anyways, people have to wait a little bit to see it.
I'm not commenting on that.
All right, and with that, let's get to the show. We're discussing the Canadian Football League's playoff picture.
A new poll regarding the 3-down league's incoming rule changes.
Machine Gun Kelly playing the 112th Grey Cup halftime show.
The USports regular season coming to an end.
And contract extensions in Montreal for general manager Danny Machocha and head coach Jason Moss. But first, the Edmonton Elks were eliminated from playoff contention following a 37-24 loss to the BC Lions, locking the other four West Division teams into the postseason. Let's do a post-mortem focused on what went wrong and perhaps also well for the green and gold in 2025. How can Edmonton improve entering the 2026 CFL season?
Well, I think what went wrong was simply this team's awful start, right? I've said it on this show. I'll say it again. My least favorite common phrase in CFL circles is, oh, well, the season doesn't start till Labor Day. Well, this team started the year 1-6 and their year was done, right? This division was too competitive. Starting 1-6, you can still maybe squeak into the playoffs in the East Division some years. But the West, where there's more teams, where historically it's been more competitive, you can't do that, right? Like the Elks, I've got my notes in front of me here. They're 6-4 in their last 10 games. They've covered the spread 8 times in that 10-game streak. Impressive, but not good enough, right? And I think it comes down to two main facets. The first is defensively. I think this unit has really settled in. I think J.C. Sherritt has shown a lot of growth in his first year as a defensive coordinator. Obviously, a former award-winning linebacker, helped the Saskatchewan Roughriders reach the West Final as an assistant last year. I think he's going to be a really good DC. I think he was confused at the start of the year. Really blitz-happy defense, even though they went out and spent the most money of anybody in the league on that defensive line to try to get pressure with 4. Ironically, the defense also improved when a bunch of their star-studded, highest-paid players got hurt. Like Jake Serezna was out for most of this latter part of the season. Robbie Smith out for most of this latter part of the season. You look at Niles Morgan out for most of this latter part of the season. Or you look at the league's most outstanding rookie or reigning most outstanding rookie, Nick Anderson, out for most of this latter part of the season. Well, you've got guys stepping up on this team, guys who nobody had really heard of before this year, guys like Shaylin Garnes, guys like Kenneth Logan Jr., who I'm a huge fan of, J.J. Ross on the back end. And when you've got guys stepping up on rookie deals, that poses huge opportunity for the following year. And I don't want to defend what happened last year at Edmonton because I think Chris Jones at the end of the day did a really poor job as the head coach and GM of this team. But it almost makes me feel like rather than ripping this thing to the studs, incoming general manager Ed Hervey would have been better served. Don't get me wrong, it needed a renovation, but maybe instead of ripping it to the studs, some areas of this roster, maybe you just needed to rip the carpet up. Or this part of the roster might just need a fresh coat of paint, right? Maybe you don't have to burn the whole thing to the ground and rebuild it from the ashes. And then on the offensive side, I mean, I'm sure you'll talk a lot about Troy Ford, so I don't want to get into that territory too much. But I do think one spot this team needs to get better at for 2026 is the receiver position. This is a team where very, very clearly, loudly and emphatically, Ed Hervey said he wasn't going to pay Eugene Lewis what he had been making previously, and that's fine. But this team got into a track meet against the BC Lions in Week 20 to try to keep their playoff hopes alive. and they couldn't compete. So this team does a good job of protecting the ball. They've got a bona fide star in Justin Rankin in the backfield. They can do a lot of things well, but they have to be more explosive, I think, in 2026. Obviously, Cody Fajardo, not the most explosive quarterback in the CFL, but he's a guy who has won a Grey Cup as a starter, who has proven that he can push the ball downfield at least at times. So I think they need to get better at the receiver position for next year.
I think when we look at the Edmonton Elks overall in 2025, we have to understand that it's a rookie head coach in Mark Killam, as much as he's had a whole bunch of experience with the Calgary Stampeders and even was the head coach, I believe, for at least one game with the Stamps. It's much different when you're the guy making all of these decisions week to week. And I think he showed his upside, especially as the season went along. And then the coaching staff clearly came together, really started to understand their personnel much better, I thought, as the season went along, how to use it. You alluded to JC Sherritt on the defensive side of the football. I thought there were some positive things from him as the season went along, especially post-Labor Day. And offensively, a lot of the talk is going to revolve around the quarterback position and Trey Ford, and then also the benching of Ford and putting Cody Fajardo into the lineup. Through week 20, Cody Fajardo was a starter at 6-6, which doesn't seem great, but if this team played 500 football leading into him being the starter, the Elks would be in the playoffs. And there's even more upside there because 4 of the losses that Fajardo and the Elks suffered while he's been the starter have come by a very small margin there. So I think his record could be even better. Those 4 losses were by 4 points or less. So I'm not saying that those could have been wins, but I think if you have a more cohesive group potentially coming back together for the 2026 season, that could bode well for Edmonton. Hodge, as you alluded to, if you have some of these players stepping up on rookie contracts, you're going to have money to, let's say, give Cody Fajardo a solid contract extension that's going to want to make him stay around in Edmonton and continue to work with the staff that's over there, including offensive coordinator Jordan Maksimic. At running back, you have Justin Rankin, but I think that either Edmonton has to go out and find a receiver or 2 that they bring in next year that stand out as rookies, or they got to look at free agency or potentially trades to get a bona fide guy, because I think that's where that team is really lacking. And perhaps all that money, as you talked about too, Hodge, didn't need to be spent on the defense, that you could have added an impact pass catcher for Trey Ford when he started the season, or Cody Fajardo at the back end of the season. So to me, the real key for this team in 2026 is the fact that ideally, if you're Mark Killam, you can bring back most, if not all, of the coaching staff for their second year together. I would think ideally the staff would like to have Cody Fajardo as their starting quarterback. And oh, by the way, we got to remember, this guy was a Grey Cup MVP not too long ago in 2023, leading the Alouettes to a Grey Cup. So he has that pedigree. And then there's a major decision there to be made with Trey Ford. And it was interesting to see Mark Killam be asked about Trey Ford, Hodge, because you and I and JC all had the same reaction when he was essentially asked, does Trey Ford have a future with the Edmonton Elks? And he said pretty quickly and succinctly that he believes Trey Ford has a future in the CFL. But he did not say that that future was with the Edmonton Elks. And there were some fans online, some of the comments I saw were like, well, he was choosing his words carefully. And I'm like, no, I think that's sending a message to Trey Ford and his camp about where he's going to potentially be next season or where he's not going to be. And it seems like that's probably not going to be in Edmonton.
Yeah, I think Mark Killam's a really smart guy. And I agree that he's an effective communicator. To me, this is, and I'm providing my own speculation here. I don't want to put words into Mark Killam's mouth. I'll let his words speak for himself. My interpretation of his words was coach speak for he's not going to be back here, right? Trey is going to get Trey dead or his butt is going to get cut. That's what I think that meant. And there is an upcoming roster bonus for Trey Ford this offseason. That'll be something the Elks have to deal with. He's not getting that bonus if he's not going to be the starter for 2026. And right now, I don't think you can make him the starter for 2026. Certainly, if you can get Cody Fajardo back, a guy who doesn't have the same peaks as Trey Ford. But the problem with Trey Ford has never been a lack of sensational plays. It's been the low valleys, right? That is the part of Trey Ford's game that can get you into trouble. Whereas Cody Fajardo, maybe doesn't have the highest peaks of anybody in the CFL, but he has very few valleys, right? He is a very, flat kind of quarterback. Like he reminds me a little of Matt Nichols in that regard. Like he never gets high, but he very rarely gets low. And you can win with that. You can. I think he needs a little bit of help again in the receiving core. I also think the offensive line, which did improve over the course of the season, could be better. I thought Martez Ivey, who I thought was the best offensive lineman in the CFL last year, struggled at left tackle this season. That's a spot where either they need to upgrade or find a way to get Ivey back to his level from 2024. It's possible he's playing hurt this year. I don't know. But he's a player who I noticed in that regard. And then defensively, Justin, I just pulled this stat up. At the halfway point of the season, the midway point, week 10, the Elks were allowing 7 yards per play defensively. That was 8th in the CFL. As of after week 19, we don't have the stats through week 20 yet as of this recording, but they're now ranked 5th at 6.7. So that goes to show how much they improved over the latter part of the season. And they did that again, largely without their highest paid players. So if I'm the Elks, I'm going, well, Joel DeBlanco is a starter next year. Like, why would we shell out all this money for Niles Morgan, or why would we pay all this money to Nick Anderson? Guys, yeah, who are good players, but DeBlanco used the first overall pick on him in 2024, and he got his chance, and he's absolutely made the most of it. And by the way, he's going into the final year of his rookie deal next season. So either you can take the cap savings, or you can say, hey, let's do an extension now. You cut us some money, but in 2026, but get a little bit of a bump. And then maybe we don't get killed in 2027 if suddenly you're a $200,000 linebacker, right? So I think there's opportunities here for Edmonton to get some consistency, some continuity. I think they've got the right foundation. I know it's tough for Edmonton fans to hear this. This is an organization that hasn't made the playoffs since the pandemic. And the coach they fired in 2019, who had a winning record, by the way, over 4 years at Edmonton, has since gone on to winning a Grey Cup and a Coach of the Year award, which I'm sure is not something that Edmonton Elks fans like hearing. That said, I do think a little bit of patience here will pay off, if there is any left in Edmonton, because again, I do think the foundation here works. I think the coaching staff works. They just have to start hotter in 2026. And I think they will going into the second year of this regime, rather than having done what they did going into this year, which was rip everything to the studs, bring in a bunch of people who have talent, but again, the coaching staff have never done their current jobs. And pair that with a roster of guys who, like, I think it was something like 13 day one starters had never played for Edmonton before. Like, it was crazy, the amount of turnover. So keeping things consistent for 2026, I think will pay off for Edmonton. And if they start better, I do see them as a playoff team next year.
Priority number one for Edmonton has to be re-signing quarterback Cody Fajardo. We've seen them already lock up Justin Rankin, the rising star running back, use some money off the salary cap in 2025. If there's any extra cash there, I'd be giving it to Cody Fajardo and saying, okay, we want to sign you to a 2 or 3 year extension for, over $400,000 in hard money. At least start there, $400,000, $450,000, because I think he's made a real difference. And I think it's important to note, Hodge, as the ebbs and flows of Cody Fajardo's career have gone, he was great with Saskatchewan at the start. And then, there was a lot of negativity, obviously, with the way that he left Saskatchewan. And I think Cody Fajardo, not to put words in his mouth, but would probably agree that he's matured a lot since leaving Saskatchewan. Perhaps that was one of the best things in his career. And then going to Montreal, leading the Alouettes to the Grey Cup, the infamous speech that he gave, and then now transitioning and accepting the backup role, at least to start the season, being a good soldier. And then when he's gotten his opportunity, has again showed he can produce at a high level. Going into that game against BC, he was leading the league in completion percentage at 75%. That's come down a little bit now. So he's tied with Trevor Harris at 73.2 through 20 weeks. But still, Cody Fajardo can play at a high level in the Canadian Football League. And the Edmonton Elks, the green and gold, whatever you want to call them, would be wise to lock him down with a contract. If there's any cap space left, if there's not, then that needs to be agreed to and then signed on January 1st. Because if Cody Fajardo was a quarterback for Edmonton the entire season, I think we're talking about a team that is a scary one to face in the postseason in 2025, let alone what could happen in 2026. There's, of course, going to be a bunch of other moves that occur around the Canadian Football League. But what Edmonton has shown down the stretch here with Mark Killam, the staff, Ed Hervey, and the rest has to be very intriguing for the green and gold as a franchise overall.
For the record, I'd call them the green and yellow. And if they want to be called the green and gold, then they should go back to wearing gold like they did decades ago. Same thing for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I'm looking at you. It's not gold. It's not gold. If that color was the medal at the Olympics that the winner got, the first thing they'd say looking down at that medal is, why is this medal yellow? Why is it not gold? But I digress. I'm getting into the weeds here. Justin, let's update the CFL's playoff picture leading into the final regular season. That's this week. In the East Division, it's pretty simple. Hamilton clinches first place if the Tiger Cats beat the Red Blacks on Friday night. If the Ticats lose, Montreal could clinch first place with a win over Winnipeg on Saturday. I'll hit you with this. Is there any chance the Ticats don't beat the Red Blacks?
Less than 1%.
Okay, so let's not waste any more time talking about that. 99% chance, according to Justin, that the Ticats finish first, and I agree with that. I agree with that sentiment, by the way. I do think that if the Alouettes have something to play for, they got a good shot to come into Princess Ottawa and get the win on the Saturday, but I think the Ticats, I mean, yeah, like the Red Blacks have not been sharp, right? And they got nothing to play for. We just saw the Argonauts in their last game roll over like my dog getting a belly rub in Calgary. It was awful. I think the Red Blacks will show better than that, but I don't think they're going to win against the Tiger Cats. In the West Division, it's more complicated. BC, and hold on for this, folks, can clinch second place with a win over Saskatchewan on Saturday, or if Calgary loses to Edmonton on Friday. However, the Lions could still finish as low as fourth if they lose to Saskatchewan, and Calgary and Winnipeg both win this week. The Stampeders can lock into third place with a loss to Edmonton on Friday, though Calgary can still finish as high as second with a win and a BC loss. The Bombers can only finish third or fourth, with third only being possible in the event of BC and a BC loss, a Calgary win, and a Winnipeg win. Okay, I hope you got all that, because I was the one who said it, and I'm still a little bit confused. Justin, how do you expect the seeding to end up in the West?
I think aside from all of those scenarios, what I would forecast is that we know Saskatchewan's locked into number one. I think BC will be number two and host the West semifinal. Calgary, number three, and then Winnipeg becomes the crossover. That said, I do think there is a chance that Edmonton beats Calgary. And I think that's the one key here that could change everything, I should say, because we expect Winnipeg to beat Montreal if indeed Hamilton beats the Red Blacks, which we both agree is a 1% or less of a chance. So I think that's the likely order of finish here. But, as we've seen this year in the CFL, Hodge, sometimes it's difficult to predict at the best of times.
It is. And I, for the record, think the same thing. I mean, BC will finish second if they win, and they're playing a Riders team that has nothing to play for. The only caveat, of course, is that the Lions have the last game. They're the late game on Saturday. Everything will be done before that. So I do think that the odds are Calgary will beat Edmonton, a team that, again, has nothing to play for, which will force the Lions to play hard in that last game against a Riders team that, played the B squad, essentially. I called them the rest Riders in that game against Winnipeg, Justin. And they played like the rest Riders. Not so much on defense. Their starters were great. But 8 backups starting on offense, that obviously showed. Only, I think, 154 net yards for the green and white in that game. But at the end of the day, if there's one team here that's going to lose, I think it's the Bombers, because as you mentioned, the Owls might have something to play for. And I think the Alouettes are the best of these three opponents. And the Bombers are the only team that can't get a home playoff game, right? They can't get to second. Second place will be BC or Calgary. So honestly, if I'm the Bombers, I don't know if I particularly care about finishing third or fourth. Third, I think, is maybe better just because Nathan Rourke has really struggled at times against Jordan Younger's defense. But I think that BC and Montreal are the two best teams in the CFL right now. So if I'm Winnipeg, I'm going, crap, I got to go on the road to one of the two best teams in the CFL. The Bombers cannot go to Calgary. Oh, no, yes, they can. Technically, if Calgary wins, Winnipeg wins, and BC loses, they can go to Calgary. The Bombers got swept by the Stamps, so I don't think they want that either. But I do think it'll be BC 2 hosting Calgary in the West Semi, and the Bombers crossing over. For the record, the Bombers have never crossed over before, but they also did play in the East Division 21 years. So I don't think the Bombers going to the East is some big deal. The only team that's never crossed over, other than the Bombers, is the Stamps, which is kind of interesting. The Stamps could technically be or no, they can't be the crossover team this year. The Bombers can't finish ahead of Calgary. So no, the Stamps are locked into second or third, so we will not get the first ever Stampeders crossover. I assume the Lions desperately don't want to cross over. They've done that a bunch of times, and it hasn't bode very well for them. So I think that it'll be BC, Calgary, Winnipeg, in that order.
If I'm the Bombers, Hodge, I essentially treat this game as the Riders did a week ago and rest anybody that might need to heal up some bumps and bruises for the playoffs, because you're going to be on the road anyways. And as you pointed out, it doesn't really matter where you go from, just even a travel standpoint, because you're right smack in the middle of the country. So if I'm Mike O'Shea, that's what I would be doing with my group, unless you believe that you need to find a rhythm, especially on offense, which I could understand that argument from Winnipeg after not looking very good at all against Saskatchewan, and a lot of the backups played for the Riders there, or at least were being rotated through on defense. Meanwhile, if you're Calgary, it's easy. It's in front of you, right? Go win this game in Edmonton and then make BC have to win in Saskatchewan. Like, you don't want, if you're the Calgary Stampeders, to lose, then BC can just go like, okay, well, we'll rest some guys who are, nicked up, and will be great to go for that home playoff game, potentially against Calgary. So I think it's easy to see who has the real effort behind them to field the full lineup and win here. And that gives us a little better view into this. But I'm sure Edmonton's sitting there with Mark Killam and saying, no, we don't want to give the Stampeders a win. Like, we're going hard after this. We want to carry some of this momentum that we've built late in the season over into 2026 as we end 2025 strong. So that's a great tilt, I think, that will happen on Friday night. And then, as the Riders showed in Winnipeg there, like, I don't think it will be easy for BC to get a win over whoever's on the field at Mosaic Stadium, because Corey Mason, it's cliche, but he said it, the standard is the standard. And I think, Hodge, you saw it live in person there at Princess Auto Stadium. Whoever comes onto the field there for Saskatchewan is capable of playing well. Not all the time. There was a coverage bust on the back end there. There have been some secondary issues throughout the season, but this team can put the next man up in the lineup and play well. So if you're Calgary, that's what you want to do. Win in Edmonton, force BC to have to go out there and win in a difficult place to play at Mosaic Stadium, and then see how the playoff chips fall.
Yeah, the Riders, I was impressed with the tenacity they played with. They took advantage of Winnipeg's mistakes. They made a couple key mistakes late in that game, including the pyramiding call, which I think was a little dubious. I admittedly didn't watch it back, but according to some of the chatter that I saw online and the opinions of a couple people I trust, I don't know if the call was totally legit. That being said, I thought the Bombers played very sloppy, and the Riders almost beat them without, arguably their 12 best players. So that is pretty impressive when you're going on the road. As for Mike O'Shea, he did say before the bye that he wanted his team to be rolling going into the playoffs. He admitted that they played very sloppy. I believe his exact words to describe it were sloppy, 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 close quote. 3 sloppies, not just one, not just 2, 3 sloppies. But he did also argue that, well, one game is enough time to get rolling going into the playoffs. So I don't think the Bombers are going to rest anybody this game, but we'll have to wait and see. Again, I don't think it particularly matters what the Bombers do in this one. For the Elks, I will say, Justin, one point I'll make quickly. The Elks finished 7-11 last year. I think if you want to point to improvement, right? I think getting a win over Calgary here, winning the season series over your arch rival, which is currently tied 1-1, and finishing at least a little better than last year, 8-10. Not a good record, but better than last year, I think does maybe inspire a little bit of confidence for your fans who, as stated earlier in the show, are not a particularly patient bunch, right? At least you can say, hey, look, we're trending in the right direction. We're going into year 2 of this coaching staff, and we're gonna do a great job of growing this thing and getting back to the postseason in 2026. Hopefully, for their sake, the West will be a little less tough. Maybe that'll make that a little more feasible.
With the way Zach Collaros got beat around in that game against Saskatchewan,
Oh,
I'd be like, Zach, I know you probably want to play, but you can sit down and rest up, because there was a number of times, Hodge, he had to peel himself up off the turf after taking big shots in that game. And to be quite honest, it looked like at times to me that he was one of the few Bombers that was giving a maximum effort. Like, he was trying to drag that team to a win almost all by himself on offense. I know Brady Oliveira did have some runs there. We saw the little bully ball celebration in the fourth quarter. But that's what I would be looking at in terms of rest, is like letting Zach Collaros heal up a little bit, especially with the season that he's gone through and the hits that he's absorbed.
yeah, the protection has not been good enough for Zach Collaros this year. There's no doubt about that.
A recent poll conducted by Probe Research indicated 42% of people who are CFL fans or who are at least aware of the 3Down League's upcoming changes said they will watch less CFL football if the rule changes are actually implemented. Interestingly, these same fans were asked how they'd feel about further Americanization of the game, with 23% stating they'd support a change to 4 downs, 34% stating they'd oppose a change to 4 downs, and 26% indicating they could live with a change to 4 downs. What do you make of all this data or data? How do we say it? Data or data?
I think you can say it either way. Potato, potato. Though, bizarrely, no one has ever said potato, ever. I don't know where that phrase comes from. Regardless, this poll is kind of wild to me. And I kind of get it, right? These changes were just announced. And apparently, when polling people, Probe was only able to get 30% or so who had even heard that these changes had happened, right? 70% of people weren't aware. So I don't put like a huge amount of stock into people's reactions to the rule changes, partly because they don't seem to make a ton of sense against one another. Like, for instance, when asked if they support these new rule changes, and this is among the people who reported to be CFL fans, that's 40% of the respondents. 60% said they do not follow or care about the CFL. But of those 40%, 42% said they support the changes, and 20% said they oppose. Now, only 10% said they strongly support, and only 11% said they strongly oppose. In other words, apparently 79% of people don't have a strong opinion on this, and 37% of the CFL fans who responded said they're unsure about these changes. However, at the same time, there was encouraging data saying that these fans think that these changes are going to make the game more exciting. But at the same time, there was a swing towards people saying they're less likely to watch the CFL. So it seems like there's a chunk of people out there who are like, yes, these changes are going to make the CFL more exciting, but I'm actually going to watch less CFL games as a result of these changes, which is obviously a bizarre combination. One would think that those two things would correlate. More exciting, more viewership. Less exciting, less viewership, which is, again, why I'm a little dubious on this. I'm also a little dubious because one of the questions about the, quote, Americanization of this game was if the CFL should adapt an NFL regulation-sized ball. Well, breaking news for Probe Research. The balls have been the same size for like 10 years, like a long time. They've been the same for a long time. That is not a thing. But I do appreciate the questions they asked in terms of the number of players, the narrower field, the downs. To me, I think if you're looking at the data you laid out, JC, hopefully the CFL looks and sees that 3 downs.
Yo, JC's
is
sick,
a lot.
bro.
Sorry?
You said JC. He's sick.
I said Justin, but maybe I misspoke. that you laid out, 23% stating they'd support a change to 4 downs, 34% stating they oppose a change to 4 downs. I mean, if I'm the CFL, I'm going, okay, so 4 downs not popular, but also 23% like it, 26% say they could live with it. Well, that's now a majority, right? It's a small majority. Like I guess it's 49%. But hey, if we're only going to peeve off 34% of Canadians with the change to 4 downs, maybe it's on the table. Obviously, I don't think the CFL should go to 4 downs. I'm not a proponent of 4 downs in Canada, but those are my takeaways. There are some interesting demographics I want to get into, Justin, but before that, I want to give you a chance to get your 2 cents in here.
Man, Hodge, we were talking about this. Polls are a little bit here and there for me. Like, I don't know how much to trust it because in reality, it's a small sample size. Like, the population of Canada, is over 40 million people now. And we're talking to over 1,200 for this poll. Like, to me, that's not quite enough. I suppose it gives us an indication, and these are how polls are done in various different areas, but it's a decent idea, I guess. But until these changes are implemented or people online are talking about, giving up or canceling their season's tickets, I don't think we're really going to actually know. Like, this gives us an idea, but often, talk is cheap and actions speak louder than words is what I like to say. So let's see what the real data shows. Like, let's see if people actually do cancel their season's tickets for 2026 or 2027 and beyond. I don't think people have an issue really with any of the tweaks in 2026. It's the major ones in 2027, the 55-yard line being ripped out, or the C, as a lot of people like to refer to it as, that stands to them, at least for Canadian, and I think I would fall in that category. And then the uprights being moved to the back of the end zone. I understand the ideas behind it. We've talked about it a bunch on the podcast, but until we get to 2027 and the fans vote with their cash, then I don't think we're really going to know. The rest is speculation and perhaps informed speculation, though I do think the rest of the data, Hodge, that you wrote an article off for 3DownNation is more intriguing than this rule change data, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I think that for a couple reasons. One is, again, these new rule changes, I think, honestly, a lot of fans don't necessarily know what the rule changes are, and I don't want to sound disrespectful. There are lots of fans who, of course, do, and they've done their research, they've done their homework, they get it, they've wrapped their mind around it. Some people don't, right? And even the probe research question regarding ball size shows me that maybe they haven't done their homework 100%, right, on what these potential rule changes are. That said, I do put stock into when someone picks up the phone or answers an online survey, whether they themselves are a self-identified hardcore CFL fan, casual CFL fan, or non-CFL fan. And to me, the demographics that were laid out in this survey are really interesting. For example, there are 3 age groups that when you really dig into the data are represented. One is under the age of 35, the youngs. The next is 35 to 54, the middles, or the 55 plus crowd, which I will affectionately refer to as the olds. My apologies to the 55 plus crowd. But the group that has the youngest hardcore CFL fandom, self-reported, is the youngs, which I was shocked to see. 14% of respondents under the age of 35 claim to be hardcore CFL fans. Only 7% of the middles are hardcore CFL fans, self-identified. And of the olds, it's 12%. I was shocked that the highest percentage was the youngs. Now, among casual fans, it's a lot more even. The youngs are 27%, and the middles and the olds are tied at 30%. But when you add those groups together, the hardcores plus the casuals, it's basically even across the board. And the youngs are just as likely to be CFL fans as the olds. The middles are a little bit lower at 37%, but the youngs are 41%, the olds are 42%. And we've seen some polling. I've got it in my column that's up at 3DownNation.com if you'd like to read it. But there was a 2023 poll from the Angus Reid Group that had some really troubling demographics in terms of age, where the olds were almost twice as likely to be CFL fans as the youngs. And you can say, well, that poll was garbage. You can say this poll is garbage. We're all entitled to our opinion about polls. But at the very least, this poll was very encouraging, I thought, from an age standpoint. And the other thing that I thought was extremely interesting is that among the respondents to this latest Pro Research poll who were born in Canada, which was 78% of the respondents, 41% of them claimed to be a CFL fan in some capacity, either a hardcore or a casual. Among the 22% of respondents who were not born in Canada, the number was identical, 41%. And to me, that is a brilliant sign for the CFL, because if people who immigrate to this country don't give a rip about the CFL and young people don't give a rip about the CFL, this league does not have a future. If young people and people who immigrate to this country do care about the CFL, which according to this data, young people and people who immigrate to Canada are basically equally as likely to like the CFL as anybody else, this league has a sustainable future. And if capitalized upon, we might even see the CFL grow.
Heaven forbid that happens, Hodge, and franchise valuations go up, and the league actually talks about how it makes money and the salary cap increases, players get more money. Like, imagine that. What a world. You know, the question that I wish could be answered or was perhaps asked in this poll, and perhaps we should do our own poll, is asking people who are non-CFL fans if the rule changes would cause them to watch the Canadian Football League. I'll give you an example. I want to shout them out anyways, but I went to this place in Fergus called PN Barbershop and talked to my guy, Spenny Cut. So we'll call him Spenny, okay? And we were shooting the breeze about a bunch of CFL stuff. Well, he did a sick cut. Apparently, the guy who owns the place cuts Jose Barrios' hair or does his barber detailing, which I think was pretty cool. But Spenny is an avid NFL watcher, and he was essentially saying to me that he had heard about the changes, and to him, and I think he was in his early 20s, is going to make him actually try out watching the Canadian Football League because the uprights will be put at the back of the end zone. So if these changes are going to have that desired effect, and I think the CFL would be wise to show that data when and if it can get its hands on it, that would help the hardcores understand these changes. I feel like the disconnect right now is that there is a lack of reasoning behind making these changes, data included, because they only did it off of, roughly 3 months of data. I get that there is other deeper thinking into this, and Steve Daniel, who is a great statistician for the league, has talked about some of the ideas behind it, but scoring's not an issue in this league. You know what I mean? The players are not an issue in this league. The game is not the issue. And I'm going to harp on it because it's true. The business needs to improve and become an actual, real, legitimate business. You have Stuart Johnston out here talking about wanting the CFL to become one of the legitimate, high-profile North American sports leagues. Well, for that to happen, just look around at the NFL, MLB, NHL, heck, the MLS. Franchise valuations are growing. The amount of money being invested into the teams is growing. That's how proper business works on a small scale or a big scale. So I think the CFL would be wise to track that data and show it to the hardcore fans so they can keep them happy while these changes occur.
I don't disagree. I found, as part of my research for this column I did, a poll from the Strategic Council that came out in September, so just 1 month ago, that found that 32% of Canadians were CFL fans. Admittedly, I didn't get the raw data. I just saw the reporting off of this poll. So I'd be curious how they quantified fandom, because some polls, it's like there's diehards and casuals and non-fans. Some it's like there's super fans and casual fans, and the non-fans. And there's some that blur the lines even more, where it's like you're not a casual fan, but you're not a non-fan. So like it's a little hard to quantify. But theoretically, the same qualifications were used for other leagues, and self-reported among Canadians, 58% said that they are NHL fans. 37% said they were NFL fans, 34% said they were MLB fans, and 29% said they were NBA fans. So already the CFL is very close to the NFL, MLB, and NBA. A little ahead of the NBA, a little behind the other two. The NHL is way ahead. And I think it's interesting. Like, I looked at some American polling regarding NFL fandom, and across a bunch of them, and this is just me taking a look at 3-4 polls and trying to interpret the data roughly, but it seems like on average, polling in the United States says that about 60% of Americans are NFL fans of some type. Either they're diehard fans, they're engaged fans, they're casual fans, or intermittent fans, but they're fans of some kind. So to me, it's interesting that in Canada, it's 58% for the NHL. In the US, it's 60% for the NFL. That to me means probably the maximum of any country, right? You can maybe get about 60% of the population. Obviously, the NFL is the biggest league in the United States. The NHL is the biggest league in Canada. And if the CFL is somewhere currently between 32 and 40%, there's probably about another 20% they could grow to. 60% would make them as big as the NHL is in Canada. I doubt the CFL can become as large as the NHL in Canada, just because we are a hockey nation first
I think
and
it
foremost.
could, though. Look at the television ratings, especially regionally.
I don't think it's impossible. I think it's unlikely. But even if the CFL could get from that, again, according to these couple polls, somewhere between 32 and 40, even if you can get to 50, right? You can get halfway between where you are now in terms of differential to the NHL and just break half that difference, close half that gap. That would be substantial growth for the league, huge growth for the league. And apparently, again, they are growing among young people, and there's no gap between Canadians born here and Canadians not born here, which, again, super positive trend. It's only one poll. I don't want to overreact to it, but I think it's noteworthy and newsworthy that one poll has drawn some very positive conclusions about the recent developments of CFL demographics.
If you are in the age demographic that Hodge has dubbed olds, you can direct your hate mail to John Hodge at 3DownNation. I'm just joking around.
We are going to get some complaints about the olds, yes. And look, I don't want to preach to anybody, but like, the opposite of young is old, and I know that there's like all kinds of words we use to soften it. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is a mature audience, or like, oh, this is a senior audience. It's like, I'm sorry, but
why not say youngs, middles, and the wise?
Not all old people are wise, dude, but I appreciate what you're saying.
I'll give them the benefit of the doubt here.
Fair enough. I just think at a certain point, like I'll put it this way. My grandmother, who passed away at the age of 94 this spring, did not consider herself old. And I love my grandmother, but that is also one of the most delusional things I've ever heard a person say. Well, I don't think I'm old. Oma, you're 94. Sorry. It's all good. I don't think 55 is old, by the way, but the category isn't 55 years old. It's 55 plus, which includes everybody else, but I digress. Speaking of things that olds don't like, Machine Gun Kelly, better known as MGK, has finally been announced as the 112th Grey Cup halftime show. Our Lady Peace will perform during the kickoff show, while Manitoba Métis country artist Katie St. Germain will sing the national anthem. Dunk, what do you make of the MGK selection?
I think it helps in that, what did you call them? Youngs category? To get more of them at least intrigued about the Canadian Football League. And the wise category, as I'll refer them to, you got to understand that the CFL can use the halftime show to attract new fans, to hopefully have your league be one that's around for a long, long time, far after, some of us are passed away, hopefully, and potentially forever. We'll see. I know that's how some hardcore fans feel. So that's why I think MGK is a great get for the league. He is hip to it with a bunch of the kids, especially it getting into that youngs category that Hodge touched on. And that is how you attract new people to your league. People might say, oh, MGK's playing the halftime show for what? What's a Grey Cup? Oh, it's a championship game for the Canadian Football. What's the Canadian Football League? We have a football league in our country that's been around for well over 100 years and is playing the 112th edition of its championship game. Like, That is the word of mouth that could occur here when you have acts like, even going back to Green Day. Last year, the Jonas Brothers were huge. They even did a press conference and talked about the Canadian Football League, Hodge. They knew who Chad Kelly and I think I think they knew who Nick Arbuckle was.
Well,
They
they
knew
they
Kelly had
knew
a
that
leg injury.
somebody's leg had just suffered a nasty snap broken injury. They didn't say the name Chad Kelly, but they said they saw a nasty leg injury. They also
Which
called you
Jonas brother was
Dustin,
that?
which I'm not sure we've ever talked about on the podcast, but they called you Dustin, which was awesome.
That's one of my, I guess we'll call her niece's favorite stories from the last Grey Cup. Is that one of the Jonas brothers? Who was it? Do you remember, Hodge?
It was Joe. Yeah, it was Joe.
Joe. Joe called me Dustin. I suppose that's some sort of claim to fame. But what the CFL is trying to do is get a new demographic of people there, perhaps a new demographic of people that stick around, watch some of the third quarter or watch some of the second quarter leading into the halftime show and go, actually, like, this football is entertaining. Despite some of the changes we're talking about making, especially 2027, the way it is now, pretty entertaining. I don't think the goalposts are going to get in the way of MGK's halftime act. I hope not. I think there's a lot of room around there to shoot it, but that's what it's designed for. So I can understand some of the whys or some of the middles in Hodge's categories that I'm sort of putting a better name on here, especially for the whys, that they want a Canadian act. But it's not just as easy because it would have already happened, Hodge. If you wanted to say, hey, Drake, you want to play the halftime show? Yeah, cool, I'll do it. It just doesn't quite happen that way. And then the other part of this, too, is MGK is American. He's well known, not just in the United States, but around the world. So you potentially get a new American audience tuning into your game when you have a current television partner such as CBS. So there are multiple factors to weigh into it here. And I understand being proud to be Canadian, being passionate about it. I am definitely those things as well. And it would be cool to see a high profile Canadian act every single year at the Grey Cup halftime show. But there's also a marketing aspect to this outside of Canada and even in Canada as well. So I really do like it. That said, Hodge, next year in Calgary, there is nobody better to get than Tate McRae. She has to play the halftime show, okay? That's putting pressure on her, Jay McNeil, whoever else is involved with the Grey Cup halftime show. Tate McRae has to do it. That is an absolute tap-in. Make it happen.
For the record, I just looked on YouTube here. So the Jonas Brothers, on their official account, uploaded the Grey Cup halftime show from last year. It's garnered over 250,000 views. And these are not hardcore CFL fans, I would assume, primarily watching this. This is probably the Jonas Brothers fans watching the Jonas Brothers YouTube videos. Green Day also uploaded their performance from Hamilton in 2023. It has over 500,000 views, and that's just YouTube, right? That's not even the Instagram and everything else, the TikTok following and the hits that these types of performances are garnering. And I'm sure what the CFL wants is for the algorithm, right? These things that we rely on all the time to feed us curated content that, mathematics thinks we're going to like. And say, oh, well, this person watched a 30-minute performance of this band at the Grey Cup. That's a CFL thing. Let's try to push the more CFL content, right? If you're on your Instagram feed and you like a video of the Jonas Brothers performing the halftime show, what the CFL wants is that person to then be fed CFL highlights in their feed and potentially become someone who buys a ticket to a game, tunes into a game on television, gets a t-shirt for Christmas, or whatever else. So I think this is smart for the CFL. I know that there are fans who are offended when the Grey Cup halftime show doesn't personally curate to their, or isn't personally curated to their exact musical taste. I'm personally not sure why they think the Grey Cup halftime show would be curated to their personal taste, but I agree that this is a good option. I'm admittedly not familiar with MGK's rankings. I am a middle. I'm not a young. So I'm someone who will learn about MGK. I had heard the name before. I didn't realize that he'd gone from Machine Gun Kelly to MGK. I'm also a little bit disturbed that he spells it lowercase MGK. The grammarian in me wants capital letters. And also when I looked at a bunch of his songs, the grammar in his songs make no sense. And a bunch of them have lowercase letters instead of uppercase. That bothers me, but that's because I'm a middle who really identifies as an old. I've always thought of myself as an older person, not as old as JC, who ironically is the youngest person on this show, but at heart has been a 65-year-old man since he was 12. But I'm excited for the concert. I'm excited to see MGK perform, and I have started listening to some of his music, and I realized while checking it out, there's one song of his that I did actually know. I didn't know it was MGK, but I'm like, oh, okay, I've heard this song before. And it's a pretty good song. So I'm excited to learn new stuff. I will also say, as a middle, I grew up with Green Day. The Jonas Brothers were very popular when I was in high school, but this is the first artist where I'm like, okay, this is somebody who, if you're my age, which is a young middle, right, you did not grow up with this act. So this is maybe the most young kind of centric act, we can call it, that the Grey Cup has ever had, which again, I think is smart. We need young people getting invested in this league, invested in this game. Grey Cup halftime show is a great opportunity to do that. If you're a 65, 75-year-old person, I'm sorry it's not, Blue Rodeo, but you're already watching the Grey Cup. The CFL doesn't they already know you're watching. They need to try to attract people who aren't going to watch. So MGK, good pick.
The USports regular season is set to wrap up this weekend in the Canada West, RSEQ, that would be the Quebec Conference, and out east in the Atlantic University Sport Conference, while the OUA has already finished its 8-game regular season. Quarterfinal playoff games go on Saturday. What do Canadian football fans need to know about the university playdowns around the country?
Well, there's a ton of really good action. I've got a column up at 3DownNation, my weekly Around U Sports column, breaking it all down, but I'll highlight just a few games here. Laurier and Western, a battle of 7-0 teams, met in London on campus at Western this past weekend. I was expecting the Golden Hawks to win in a tight, hotly contested football game. That didn't happen. The Golden Hawks won this game 60-13. They put up 33 points in the third quarter alone, absolutely blowing the doors off the Mustangs to clinch first place in the OUA. And the only bye week, Western will host Guelph, the number 2 seed, hosting the number 7 seed this week. And man, this really feels like a shifting of powers. Yes, the Laurier Golden Hawks are the reigning Yates Cup champions. Still, I expected this game to be competitive. It wasn't. Laurier, it turns out, is that far ahead of everybody else. In Quebec, two powerhouse teams, Laval beat Montreal 16-6. The Rouge et Or almost certainly will host that or get that number 1 seed and eventually host the RSEQ championship game, formerly known as the Dunsmore Cup. Admittedly, I can never remember what the new one is called. Also in the OUA, Windsor beat Queens to finish third. The Lancers, not the most prolific offense in the OUA, but have arguably the country's best defense. That's something to watch come playoff time. Carleton, Justin, lost one of the most heartbreaking games I think I've ever seen. They were up 39-38, scored a touchdown with 1 minute left. And this is a game, by the way, they needed to make the playoffs. 7 of 11 teams in the OUA make the playoffs. Carleton needed this victory to finish 7th. They go up by a point. McMaster drives the field in the last minute. They missed a 27-yard field goal. It looks like we're heading to overtime because the Marauders did get a rouge. But guess what? 15-yard penalty on the Ravens. McMaster gets to re-kick from 12 yards out, and they make no mistake. McMaster is also a playoff team. Carleton, however, not a playoff team. They lose, giving the Griffins the last seed in the Ontario Conference. And then finally in Canada West, the Manitoba Bisons clinched a playoff berth. They will visit either the Saskatchewan Huskies or Regina Rams in the Hardy Cup playoffs. The 4th seed in Canada West still to be decided, but Saskatchewan, Regina, and now Manitoba are all in there. So a great week of U Sports action. If you're into the Ontario, aka OUA playoffs, be sure to check that out this weekend. The rest of the country, as Justin stated, we will go into the last week of regular season with some playoff berths still up for grabs.
That whooping that Laurier put on Western
Woo.
was unbelievable and potentially historical. It was definitely the worst loss in the Greg Marshall era as head coach at Western. He started there in 2007 as the bench boss. The only other game that came close to me in terms of a score line that was so lopsided the other way against Western was the Mitchell Bowl in 2013 when Western went out to Calgary and the Dinos ran roughshod over the Mustangs. That final score was 44-3. So that was a 41-point loss. My quick math would tell me that this one was a 47-point loss. Is that correct, Hodge?
That's correct.
Indeed, he's nodding his head, so we're good to go there. So as far as the historical perspective, there are people that believe it could be the worst loss in Western history, but you got to go way back into some of the record books that might not even exist. But I think that says it enough that this is the worst loss in the Greg Marshall era. But on the other side, I think we got to give full credit to this Laurier team who some people around the country questioned and wondered about their compete level with Taylor Elgersma moving on and signing a contract with the Green Bay Packers. He still remains as a free agent, hoping to get an NFL shot, but you have Cal Wither come in, transfer from Ohio University, shout out Nathan Rourke and Curtis Rourke country, and he has absolutely lit it up. His touchdown to interception ratio is unbelievable for this team. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be the second coming of Taylor Elgersma, but he has come in here in essentially his first year playing post-secondary football because he was a backup competing to move up the depth chart at Ohio University and looked really good. And this Laurier team, Michael Falds told me in week 1 when they played the Guelph Griffins at Alumni Stadium that he felt like this team might have more skill position, talent, and weapons than the team did the year before with Taylor Elgersma on it. And that included Ethan Jordan going for 1,000 yards for the first time in Laurier history in 2024. Well, Ethan Jordan has done that again, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, which is unbelievable. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that puts him in like Andy Fantu's type territory in terms of rarefied air, having done that at the USports or back in Fantu's day. It was a CIS level. And to me, you could see the development here from Laurier. Like in week 1, the Golden Hawks went up 23-0 on the Griffins. Guelph made a push in the second half. And that score, I think, ended 33-28 in a close ball game. But then you have Laurier at the end of the year in a big-time game with the number 1 seed on the line to have the playoffs go through your home field. And Laurier comes out and lays it on him. Like, I don't think this is so much laid at the feet of Greg Marshall and his team. They're going to take it that way. But we need to look at the other side of this, that Laurier absolutely dominated in all facets in this football game. Evan Hillock, who was a highly recruited quarterback, was benched in this game at Western. That doesn't very much happen at Western, where the starting quarterback gets benched in a game. And then Laurier was decisive. So there are some people around the program and the OUA in particular that are wondering, can this loss mentally affect Western for the playoffs? Like with a, let's say, game Griffin squad coming in there. And I'm not talking about them just because they're my alma mater, but Guelph went in there earlier this season and the scoreline didn't look so great, but they didn't turn the football over. And I think they had a blocked punt as well. It didn't help them out in that game. So if you're Guelph going in, you think, hey, if we play clean football and are balanced on offense, especially with Tristan Abboud, do we have a shot to upset the Mustangs who are reeling after this drubbing? I would expect it, honestly, to go the other way. I think this will probably refocus the Mustangs, but the proof will be in the performance in the OUA quarterfinal. Because, man, that was a shellacking that I was going to say too many people saw. I don't think anybody saw that score differential coming.
No, I certainly didn't. And by the way, Cal Wither, 26 touchdowns to 4 picks this year for the Golden Hawks, almost 2,500 passing yards. Pretty unbelievable. And he's a guy who I think is considered a first year in USports, which means he can play about 17 more years if he wants to. but he did spend 3 years at Ohio University. He was 22 at the time of his transfer. So if he's a guy who wants to stay at the collegiate level for much longer, he can. But he's also a guy who, if he wants in a year or two to declare for the professional league and he wants to come up to the CFL, could be a legitimate CFL prospect, which I know obviously we've seen the impact that Canadian quarterbacks like Nathan Rourke, Trey Ford, even Taylor Elgersma, a guy who's yet to play in the CFL, yet to sign a CFL contract, has created in terms of hype, in terms of buzz, in terms of interest. So Cal Wither could be the quote unquote next one.
And if you want to learn more about Cal Wither, you can go back in the podcast feed or search Callum Wither 3DownNation, because we profiled him in podcast form and also had an article on him leading into the season, because I just got a sense, Hodge, you said a couple names there, Nathan Rourke and Taylor Elgersma, that for me, being around the game and then as a reporter, and I'm sure you feel this way too, there are some guys that you just get a sense of that they're going to be a dude, right? Nathan Rourke was that guy. I felt like it was worth the time investment to cover him when he was coming out of high school in Alabama, even though he wasn't going to an NCAA program. He went to Fort Scott Community College, JUCO school, and then essentially had like a couple offers, and the best one was Ohio. So that's where he went. And look at the heights that he's gone to now. Had a similar feeling about Taylor Elgersma last year. I had heard about his development, seen him a little bit, then watching him throw. I'm like, this guy, if he can dice up defenses, could get a legitimate look in the NFL. And some of his coaches, including offensive coordinator Todd Galloway, felt the same way. I'm not saying Callum Wither is of that ilk yet, but he's certainly on his way, as Hodge pointed out. When you look at the touchdown to interception numbers, when you look at the poise that he has played with this season, and him, really playing university football for the first time. I know he's older, and he did tell me directly, Hodge, that he wouldn't necessarily want to be like a 28-year-old starting quarterback in Canada. He would want to play at a high level and ideally earn a shot in pro football, be it the CFL or the NFL. But he's got that kind of feel to me, like he could be a dude. So he's worth paying attention to. If you're a Canadian football fan and you want to get on these guys early and get a real feel for them, you should be tuning in or going out if the football happens to be in your area to see them. Like, go out to Laurier for the OUA semifinal and the Yates Cup, because that team is highly entertaining to watch offensively. And I think Michael Faulds and Todd Galloway in particular deserve a shout out, because, Hodge, lots of times we talk about it at the CFL level, the lack of quarterback development. I don't think we're in an area right now where you can point to that. But you look at Laurier, how Taylor Elgersma was developed, who was barely recruited coming out of high school. Hockey was probably more of his favorite sport. And then Faulds gets him in there, adds his competitiveness to that development track, along with what Todd Galloway can do from building an offense around a quarterback's talents. And the guy plays so well that he legitimately gets an opportunity in the National Football League. And then Cal Wither comes in, and it's been a similar track, and perhaps even a larger jump in his development with these two. So there are lots of Canadian quarterbacks that are out there that are being developed in this country, but I think it's notable what Laurier has done in back-to-back years, and actually multiple years with Taylor Elgersma, and then now Callum Wither in just his first year in the offense, which is led by Michael Faulds and the offensive coordinator, Todd Galloway.
Well, and speaking of USports, something else I've thought about is if you're a CFL fan who's like, ugh, I'm done with these rule changes, I want the CFL to stay exactly the same. Well, good news. USports has wide hash marks. They have the super short convert, right? Remember when the CFL about 10 years ago went to an actual challenging kick for the convert? Well, USports kicks from, I think it's 12 yards out. And they have no instant replay. They have no review. The call on the field is always the call on the field. There is no command center.
Sometimes there's an issue with that.
I'm not suggesting it's not a problem sometimes, but what I am saying is if you're like, ugh, I just want Canadian football how it used to be, well, then go to USports games. There's way more USports programs than there are CFL teams. So nature or by logic, there is one closer to you or as close to you as a CFL team. Watch USports. It's a great product. And it's like going to the CFL in 2002. It's a lot of fun. I like it. I'm also not against the changes that the CFL has made, but if you're just hankering for old school Canadian football, it is readily available for cheap, and you can go and you can watch and you can cheer your face off. You really can. They would love to have you.
I want to give one more shout out real quick, Hodge, before
Sure.
we move on, because something that won't be possible if these rule changes go ahead in 2027 happened live in front of my eyes at the University of Guelph, which swung the entire momentum in a game that was vital for the Griffins to get in the playoffs. Anakin Guthrie returned a missed field goal, 129 yards, literally the longest play that you can have in Canadian football, at least past 2027. That might only be in USports football and perhaps other levels underneath it. But he returned that 129 yards. It was the first points of the game for the Griffins, and Guelph went on to win a game that came right down literally to the last yard. Keegan Hall threw for over 400 yards. They ran, essentially, it was a screenplay where I believe was Javon Jacobson, who, by the way, is the brother of Saskatchewan Roughriders head coach Corey Mace, that was in on the tackle to help knock York out of bounds at the 1 yard line. So this play literally came down. This game came down to the last play, the last yard being the difference. Guelph wins, Mac wins. That got the Griffins into the playoffs. If Carleton would have won, it would have shook down much different. But there is highly entertaining football, and I wanted to make sure I got in the note about Anakin Guthrie, because that 129-yard missed field goal return is literally, record time. You can't have a longer play than that, and it's something that we're not going to see in the Canadian Football League past 2027.
Past 2026, I think you mean.
No, 2027.
You said
Oh,
past
sorry. Yes.
Starting in 2026.
After the 2026 season.
Yes. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 1956, the Montreal Alouettes defeated the Hamilton Tiger Cats by a score of 82-14. No, I did not just misspeak. The score was 82-14. The performance set new records for points in a game, 82, margin for a victory, 68, and single game net yards by one team, 799. All of which still stand today, and I honestly think will never be broken. No one's put up 82 points in a game ever again. Montreal scored 5 touchdowns in the second quarter alone, with star quarterback Sam Echeverry throwing for 6 total scores. Justin, what would you do if you played a football game and lost 82-14?
Probably go back and work harder, but I know some other people would want to quit.
That's a good attitude to have, I think. 82 points. That's, again, and do you think that's breakable, or do you think that'll stand forever?
Man, in modern pro football, I would have a hard time seeing that broken. I mean, as the saying goes, records are made to be broken, but that would have to be just an absolute beatdown, man. Like, that's a bigger score line than the Laurier Western score.
Yes. And it's already stood for 70 years. Like, it's not like this record is from 1994. Like, this record is from the 1950s. The CFL wasn't even officially incepted until 1958. So this is even, like, slightly before that. It's still reflected in the CFL's official records. But, like, unbelievable. So shout out the late, great Sam Echeverry and the rest of this Montreal Alouettes team. Well before it was popular, they were slinging the rock all over the field. I wish that there was more video evidence of the greatness that they achieved.
Let's get to my Canadian quarterback of the week, and we're going to go to Carleton because it's their QB, Elijah Barnes, who completed 27 of 36 passes for 452 yards and 5 touchdowns with 2 interceptions in a 41-39 loss to McMaster on the last play of the game. Barnes definitely played well enough to win, especially going against the university that's nearest to his hometown. He's from Ancaster. Barnes goes about 6'6", 203 pounds, if the university rosters are to be believed. Sometimes they're embellished a little bit. He's in his 3rd year there. Seems like there's a lot of upside in this Carleton Ravens quarterback. So a name to check out in 2026 on the USports scene. Let's go to the 3-minute drill. Silas Fanyal became the Atlantic University Sport Conference's all-time leading passer during his team's win over the Bishops Gators. Is that a big deal?
It is. He passed Larry Justanis, who's one of the all-time greatest quarterbacks in the history of USports. And Silas Fagnan, I think he's close to 9,000 yards, which is pretty remarkable. Good for him. Tyree Adams completed 27 of 44 pass attempts for 286 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 picks, and rushed 8 times for 26 yards in his first CFL start in almost 2 calendar years. Does he have a future with the Red Blacks?
I think he could. I've always thought, every time Tyree Adams steps on the field that he looks intriguing and with more reps could potentially prove to be a starter in this league. It could go the other way. He might not be as well, but I thought he should have played 1 week earlier, though I do think that this performance shows him being up and down. You need to protect the football a little bit better, but I think if Ottawa doesn't like him, that there's some other out teams outside of the nation's capital that could take a chance on him. Danny Machocha and Jason Moss have both signed 2-year contract extensions in Montreal with the Alouettes. Were those deserved, Hodge?
Absolutely. They finished first last year. They won the Grey Cup the year before that. This team is headed in the right direction. And honestly, would anybody be surprised if they won the Grey Cup this year? Like how good they've been with Davis Alexander. Not so impressive without him on offense, but defensively, they've been good all year. Special teams wise, they've been very good all year. And offensively, with Davis Alexander, they're tough to beat. After another impressive performance from Canadian QB Nathan Rourke, what percentage chance would you give him to win this year's MOP?
Taking a small poll from some Canadian Football League media people, I think it's probably over 90% at this point. Woo. Sorry about Levi Mitchell. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers are the lowest ranked playoff team in the 3DownNation power rankings. Is that deserved?
Of course. Did you watch that game on Friday night? Oh my gosh. I want to give the defense its flowers. You can only beat the team that's in front of you, and they were great. But, special teams, they had the fumble, and the offense was awful. Capital AWFUL. Awful. And they've got to get that sorted before the postseason, because right now they are looking like one and done.
Don't forget, Hodge, we got to tell the people out there, go sign up for the 3downnation.com newsletter. If you go to the website, 3downnation.com, it's on the right-hand side there next to our feature stories. And dude, us talking about it has worked. We've seen a solid uptick in people signing up for this newsletter. We're going to be adding some bells and whistles to it. So get in there, get that news right to your inbox, the analysis in written form that you can't find anywhere else. Don't miss out on it. Sign up for the 3DownNation newsletter.
For Justin Dunk, I'm John Hodge. We'll see y'all next time.